Hello, my friend, and welcome to this episode of A Call to Leadership. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, your host. I'm so glad you are here. Well, what do the military, Catholic Church, and transformational leadership have in common? The answers may surprise you as I embark on a new conversation with my dear friend in the leadership space, Matthew Brackett, who is a subject matter expert on these areas. He is an educated man when it comes to leadership theory. I can't wait for you to join us. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is A Call to Leadership. Hello, Matthew Brackett. Thank you for joining me on A Call to Leadership today. Good to have you back, brother.
Thank you, and Dr. Nate. Great to be here and with your people.
Yeah, absolutely. This is our very first Facebook Live, so this is exciting, and thank you for being my test subject in this new platform for us.
That's great. Yes, I think both of us are learning to do these new things.
Absolutely, and I think that is a lot of what we do in leadership is learning to do new things. I think that's a great kind of starting point for us as leaders, as people who are students of leadership, is to really start with this idea of learning to be the kind of leaders that, as we've talked about in the past, are impactful, desire to serve and help our followers, help others along their journey to a better future state.
Yes. Stepping in, as we all know, and as the audience knows, stepping out of our comfort zone, stepping into new, is difficult. It's challenging for us, for all of us as human beings. But doing so is how we discover so many new things about ourselves. We discover new ways to do things. We discover better ways to do them. We discover a lot more about people. Indeed. Yeah. And in fact, since you bring that up, I like to define leadership for the listener, for the person watching on live stream. Of course, you've been in academia and leadership. I've been in academia and leadership. Lots of definitions of leadership. Right. Many definitions. In fact, I've got a book about leadership definitions. So Ross, I think in 91, had a book of many, many different definitions of leadership. And so in my journey as a leader and as an academic, I attempted to define leadership based on a lot of my research. And so we know that it's about influence, but it's not just influence. We know that it happens in groups. We know that it revolves around common goals or common interests. Right. So I define leadership as the discovery of, influence toward, and achievement of shared purpose. At least effective leadership. Let me give a warrant to that. So one of the aspects of leadership that I think oftentimes we don't think about as leaders. And as we embark on this conversation, perhaps around some ideas around transforming leadership and some of your experiences, especially in the priesthood and beyond, as we'll uncover in our talk, some things that we didn't discuss in the last two times. We had great interviews, by the way. If you're listening and you haven't heard Matthew's conversation with me during our last two interviews, we'll put that in the show notes so that you can check that out. It's just so impactful, so powerful. So this discovery piece, Matthew, is a part of leadership that I think that we don't fully embrace and fully recognize that this is not something that's one and done. Mm-hmm. It's a continual cycle of leadership. How have you understood discovery as an essential aspect of the leadership journey? Yes, thank you, Nate. Let's go back. You said leadership has three aspects: discovery of, influence towards, and achievement of. Shared purpose. Shared purpose. All right, so yes. We're on the discovery of purpose. Yes, now back to your question. What was your question again? My question was, yes, the discovery aspect of leadership. We rarely spend time in this space, and let me just preface it with this. I tend to find, as a leader or as a teacher of leaders, that if I'm having difficulty influencing, if I'm having difficulty achieving what I would consider shared purpose or shared destination, shared goals, shared vision, then I need to go back to discovery. I need to stop trying to influence and stop trying to achieve and go back to a discovery phase so that I can find out what is truly happening in these circles, in these relationships, on this journey that's impeding influence, that's impeding achievement,
perhaps even impeding a clear understanding of what that shared or common purpose is.
Yes. Thank you. This is so good. And then I'll take this in a few levels. I think purpose, if we go back to something I like to say, that passion is the fire of purpose in our lives. Because it's hard, there's a lot of pressure on purpose. These conferences, you go to workshops. What is your purpose? Write down your purpose. You don't have a purpose, then what are you doing? But purpose is something that I think it's a continual discovery of our life. It's a lifelong journey, like many things. Where yes, we discover our purpose, but it's like a puzzle that we put together little by little. It's like something that that uncovers itself as we walk. Because there's a certain darkness about our life, and I don't mean that in a very dramatic or dark way, but we really can't see too far in front of us, right? But as we walk forward, and that's how important. As we walk forward, we discover more and more, and there's a lot of mystery. We are mystery to ourselves. There's a lot of mystery about life. There's a lot of mystery about other people, and so it's that discovery. But if we get stagnant, which often happens, right? We get stuck, then we stop discovering. And we can get stuck for many reasons. But it's why I think in the work that we do, it's really about encouraging people and motivating people and accompanying people so that they continue to take little steps forward. And we go back to, what you were saying is in the whether it be personalized or organizations, right? We kind of jump over discovery and move on to execution and achievement of goals. But if our execution and achievement of goals is not always in light of discovery, then we might end off track, right? Or missing the mark. And so that discovery, I would like to think about, first of all, in our own personal lives. It's so important. I always, I've said this before on your show, where self-awareness is probably one of the greatest leadership assets, the lack of one of the greatest leadership liabilities. In other words, how we become blind to ourselves. So I think a healthy and good leader is someone who is always on that personal discovery journey and is always curious about growing and knowing themselves more, discovering those blind spots, shedding light on those darkness, because blind spots and darkness in our own lives can influence our inner and outer circles. And so there's that discovery. Then if we're, I talk about leadership in the personal life, leadership in the inner circles and the intimate spaces, whether it be family and friends. There's a lot of discovery there. If people are in committed relationships or spouses, there's a continual discovery of my spouse and of my children. And there's a continual discovery of myself through the eyes of my spouse, through the eyes of my children, and through the eyes of my friends. And then if we go to the professional space and the organizational space, like we said, that continual discovery, because another thing that I really like to say is that one of the leaders' greatest gifts that they can give their people is clarity of communication. And clarity of communication means that I have to beat that drum continually of our identity, who we are, what's our mission, what's our vision, what are our goals, what are the expectations, what are the consequences when we don't meet our expectations. But this goes back to a continual discovery of what is our goal? What is our purpose? Who are we as an organization? Why do we exist? Because otherwise we get stuck on execution and on results, which are important, but if those are not in light of who we are, then we have this huge disconnect oftentimes. And when we talk about culture, poor culture is when there's this huge disconnect between what we say we are and then all the behaviors. So the leaders, and going back to your question, your point, this discovery, this curiosity, this in transformational leadership, what we would call intellectual stimulation is so important and so important for a leader, because a leader has to have that vision to keep people not only on track as far as performance, but on track towards identity. Now, identity, it's a continual journey. As individuals, we're continually discovering who we are, right? As I already said. And I think the same applies for organizations.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that you mentioned a few different things that I wanted to just simmer on, which one of them is this, you talked about intellectual stimulation, and one of the hallmarks of transformational leadership as a theory, as a model. And you think about the aspect of discovery. And discovery involves curiosity. It involves creativity. It involves the unknown. And as leaders, one of our primary objectives as a leader is to illuminate the possibilities for a better future state. So if that is true, then those possibilities do not currently exist in the present. That's one of the reasons why we must be in discovery, right? And effectively communicate that with clarity. And I'm so glad you brought that point up. I'm so glad you brought that point up, because we are celebrating the 60-year anniversary of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, as some do know.
Right.
And we're also in an election cycle year here in the United States at the time of the recording of this podcast. And we're just now seeing some of the early debating. And so it's interesting, because as someone who studies leadership, I study these debates from a leadership perspective, as you would expect. And one of the questions I have is this individual sharing the clarity of communication that speaks what other people dare to think, and perhaps haven't even thought of, where you can articulate effectively the vision, the desire of someone else in such a way that it's compelling, that it's attractive, that it seems achievable, that it is worthwhile in co-authoring that future. And this is such an important aspect of how we view this discovery piece, because this discovery piece to me is exciting, and it's continual, and it has so many different facets and features to it. And even as I was just listening to some of the debates, I'll just use them as an example. And as the different individuals who are putting their foot forward to become the next president of the United States, they're sharing their idea of what a vision is for a better future for this country. And so those who share in that discovery of that possibility will then say, hey, this person is speaking what I'm thinking. They are going in a direction, at least they're stating it, that I desire to go. And I think these are the embers, if you will, of leadership in terms of the beginning, before influence even begins to manifest itself. Are you going where I desire to go? Is an essential question. And I can't hope to answer that question unless I understand, I've discovered my follower or those who I walk alongside of, what their desired purpose is.
Right. Yeah, and that connection, whether it be at the presidential level, and the national level, whether it be in an organization, whether it be in a family, that connection with the others. Well, you know, what do they need? What do they want? Right? Where do we want to go? And so I think that, you know, in people in leadership roles, that connection with their people is so important, because otherwise the messaging can be very also disconnected from your people.
Right.
And this is linked to all the different, you know, if we were talking about the 4 pillars of transformational leadership, I think they all just overlap into everything that we're talking about the human experience.
About the human experience, yes. And which brings you back to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, right. I Have a Dream, because there was a discovery happening there with a clarity of communication that began with I believe in some ways that transformational model of starting with this intellectual stimulation, right? We've got a check that has not yet been able to be cashed here in the US. And so you're thinking intellectually, like, what was that check? Of course, with Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. But even before that all men, of course, all people are created equal. Even there's a check even before that. So you're stimulating the mind to identify that the transformation that was desired to happen has not yet happened. And it's the very, very clear communication that illustrates and identifies that. And so I love that example as we're talking, because it just came to me in terms of identifying the deepest desire and discovery for humanity, and to be connected with that. You mentioned connection. It doesn't have to be on a national scale. It can be on the smallest scale. It can be with a family member. It could be with your child or your spouse, a loved one.
I think it's so important. I think, you know, when we talk about leadership, we know the follower, we're the leader, the follower, and the context, right? That traditional triangle in leadership process, you know, where as you said, we discover, then we influence, and then we accomplish. But that, first of all, happens inside of us. Right? There's something in the human heart and in the human person, this tendency or this longing for transcendence. In other words, growth, becoming more, becoming greater, overcoming ourselves. There's something in us that longs for more. And so this envisioning, it's so important for us. Everyone has it on a different level, right? Some people are just huge dreamers, right? Or maybe very idealistic. Others are a little bit more realistic in the dreams. But the fact is that all of us, it's important for all of us to have it because it is something that nourishes us and energizes us as human beings. And then we make the family. What do we long for as a human being? What do we long for as a family, as a couple? What do we long for? What do we long to be and achieve as a couple? And then as an organization, as a country, going back to Martin Luther, I have a dream. And in leadership roles, if we talk about the C-suite or any, these directive teams of any organization or of a family, it's so important. I think this duality of people that can envision, and then obviously people that can also execute. And a lot of my coaching journey, every day when I deal with coaching clients that are in, senior roles, some of them are like, my whole day is dedicated to execution, where my responsibility is that I have to envision. Because if I'm not creating a vision for my people, then I don't know where to lead them to as regards execution. Right? But they get caught up in the day-to-day. And this can happen in our own lives. We get caught and we forget, where do I want to go as a couple? And that's why, when I talk about couples, investing in your relationship and your envisioning, every month, every year, to really dedicate time intentionally to refresh that family project or that couple project that we have. But the same thing would be organizations. And that's why organizations take time, for retreats and all this to kind of envision. But so important in the C-suite, I think it's so important to have people that can envision, or at least an individual that can envision, and then someone that can really execute.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the relationship with that is so critical to recognize your own giftings and strengths as a leader. And that's part of the discovery process as well. In fact, I just had an exercise with my students in my leadership elite program, and I encouraged them to send an email out to about a dozen people to ask about their genius and get feedback on where they see them in their giftings, because sometimes we have our own blind spots.
No, definitely. About our talents and strengths. And if, it's people that are great at envisioning, if you put them on execution, they'll get stuck, right? And if you put people who are good at execution on envisioning, they're going to be like, So again, putting the right people in the right place is essential. Yeah.
Now, I want to turn back a couple of pages in light of this, what you just said. You spent, was it close to 30? Was it 30 years in the priesthood? Thereabouts?
Yeah, 20 years of ministry and 10 years of preparation and education. Yes.
Yeah. And thank you for your service. And the military as well, correct?
Military as well, yes. Yes.
Do you, we've talked about this on the show, and I don't want to rehash some of the things we have talked about. There's some things we hadn't talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some feedback on questions, follow-up questions for you, especially regarding the priesthood, because people, they want to know. They have questions about some of the aspects of what of course, what you did in the priesthood and whatnot, military leadership and church leadership. One of the questions that came up was, how did leadership in the military and the church differ? This is I'm interested. Good, better, the same. Perhaps unpack that for a little bit for our listeners.
Well, there's a lot there. Now, both are very highly structured organizations. Both are very highly hierarchical. Little parentheses is, when I go to start knocking on corporate doors, right, and they don't understand my background, like you're in ministry, right? And they question if I would understand organizations. Right? Like, I've been part of the most complex global organizations, right, that exist. And so I navigate organizations, but they don't understand that, right? I think, you were reading the Bible and praying all day or whatever, right? They don't understand all the dynamics, the hierarchy, the organization stuff, the leadership. So yes, the very hierarchical. And actually, when I joined the Navy and I was at my first command as a command chaplain, the Colonel Shelton, a very good friend of mine, after just a few weeks, he's like, it looks like you've been doing this for a long time. Right? How did you adapt? I was like, if you knew where I came from, right? And not only from Catholic Church organization, but a religious order inside it, which is again highly hierarchical, global organizations, a lot of structure, and so there's a lot of I say that to say that there's a lot of similarities as regards structure, hierarchy, and culture, actually, in many ways, and that I can say that in positive ways, but also if we look at some of the more dysfunctional aspects of leadership, both in church and in the military, and they're also very, very similar. Different contexts, but very similar. Now, I don't know how much you want me to go into that.
Well, you mentioned dysfunction, so I suspect that someone will want to know how they were similar in dysfunction, right? Because there is no perfect institution.
Of course not. And I love, there's a conference I give on dysfunctional and toxic leadership, because it's a topic that definitely catches people's eyes, usually something that people have always experienced. And so when you can put concepts on it and then understanding dysfunctional and toxic leadership, then how do we understand healthy leadership? So that's one approach that I take. We won't get all into that. I suppose the organization is the front and center. Okay, so it's a culture and organization that it's really not, and this sounds terrible, I don't want to, but it's really not about the people. It ends up being about the identity of the organization. That has its place, but sometimes when that takes over, then a lot of people can suffer the consequences of that. Because, they're all organizations, especially the church, is organized so that we are all about people. But when it comes down to it, well, it ends up being really about the organizational identity. That's one aspect, and it's, again, we could unpack that. There's a lot there, but other aspects is, and there's a lot about because of the hierarchy, the strong hierarchy, and I'm not against hierarchy. I think hierarchy is important for us as human beings. There's been a sort of a modern twist to leadership where it's like, we're all on the same level, we all get along, we're all cool, right? A really lack of professionalism and a lack of formality, which in my view creates a lot of ambiguity and confusion, and that's not helpful at all as well. So I just think structure is important because everyone knows their lane, they know their roles. And so that's something I highlight as positive in those organizations. But oftentimes when you're put into these roles of, well, now you're in charge, well, then it's sort of like understood that you know best. And like other organizations, I think people aren't prepared properly for leadership roles. But right now we're just talking about military and church. There's people that end up in leadership roles for whatever reasons, and for political reasons, or because it's just the traditional structure of promotion. And so that's your next thing, or because for whatever reason you end up in a role. But you're not, for example, bishops in the Catholic Church. A lot of bishops are put into their places because of the academia. But academia doesn't mean that you're going to be a good leader of people, right? And so you might be very well prepared theologically and philosophically, but not pastorally and not in the way you lead. Right? And I think that's been a huge deficiency, the selection process. Very, in my view, I suppose in both worlds, very poor selection process. For leadership roles and preparation for, because the sort of structures were like, this is where you have to go. This is where, if you want to grow, this is where you go next.
Well,
right?
Go ahead.
Let me just close with one last idea. So when and then because you're in the structure where it's sort of very hierarchical, so, well, I'm in this role, so therefore I know best, and therefore, and obedience is considered a great value in both of these organizations, and it is a value. But when it's kind of sort of an absolute, it becomes dangerous because people can use their authority in a very authoritarian way and really not serve their people, not pay attention to the context, and sort of like what I say goes. There's moments for that, right? But it can easily become abusive.
And there's so many parallels. Thank you for sharing that, because we don't see these parallels. You have a very unique vantage point, being that you've been in both sectors and understanding it from the parallels, how that overlaps and flows into business, as well as families, really any institution, any group, if you will. And so you talked about the caring piece. If of course the institution is is essential for survival. However, it's made up of people. People have needs. Mm-hmm. And so when those needs are either not met or met in such a way that they are considered as expendable for any number of contexts, then it's a reciprocation. Because I believe that whether it's in a church, a military, a business environment, industry, in a family, in a community, in a political realm, that there is a social contract. And sometimes it's written, sometimes it's unwritten. And it generally goes like this. I agree to help you meet the general needs if you help me meet my needs. Mm-hmm. Say it's a value exchange. And so when some of those parts of the value exchange are not met, i.e., I have no real value beyond my tangible contribution to the organization. The organization does not care about me as an individual or my needs. Then I can relinquish my own caring for the organization beyond meeting my needs, mm-hmm. My general needs. And so that creates an issue. I tend to fall into the camp of start with caring. Start with, in fact, one of our core values at our accounting and advisory firm is to care extraordinarily. It's the number one core value. It probably doesn't surprise you, but it's the very first core value. It comes before our core value to think innovatively, because we believe innovation is the way to progress and growth. It comes before the core value to walk credibly, because we believe that integrity and ethics and a moral compass is essential to doing good business. It comes before our core value to grow purposefully, because we believe that growing is giving. It's literally the foundation for our entire organization, is to care extraordinarily for all of our stakeholders, by the way. Right. And so, in institutions, and some might argue and say, well, when you get to as you said, two of the most complex global organizations. I mean, that's a massive statement that you made, and it's true. These are extremely complex global organizations. Some might argue and say, Nate, that works out great in a family or a small group, perhaps even a local church or a small business, but it has no place in large organizations. What is your response to that?
Well, I think, let me use the military as an example. Now, again, every organization, they have a mission. We talk about vision, mission. And military is very mission focused, and rightly so, because if they weren't mission focused, then we wouldn't have a very good military from the aspect of defense, right, of our country. The way I would always spin it, and in my, for example, going back to the colonel that I worked for, and he was like, you coordinate my care. You are my caring branch of what I do, right? I have to be very focused on mission, but we also have to care. And the way I would spin it as well is, when we care for our people, then we're going to be more effective in our mission and a mission accomplishment. Because in that there was this creates this culture, and it also happens in church, and I'll explain in a second, this culture of, since it's all about mission, and the sort of there's this logical or erroneous conclusions in the military that since it's all about mission, we have to be strong, we have to show up, and therefore weakness is unacceptable, and therefore dealing with our humanity and showing that caring nature, caring for my people, is unacceptable, because that's sort of equal to being weak or being too human, right? And we are, a lot of Marines will say, we are killing machines. I said, no, you're not killing machines. You are human beings first and foremost. And if we care for our humanity, then you're going to accomplish your mission better. You're going to serve the country better. You're going to serve your loved ones better. You're going to serve yourself better. If we disconnect from our humanity, which is a common thing in the military, now I have to admit, there's been a huge transformation in that. There's a huge push towards taking better care of our people. I want to highlight that. But generally, it's a culture that's very much mission focused, right? And so it's like, you got to get on the wagon. And if you're not mission focused, then you're getting in the way. And so therefore, we need to get you out of the way, which is understandable. But my always, working with commanding officers was always like, if we care for our people better, we're going to be much more better in our mission. In the church, now the mission is different, but the culture was very similar in the sense that if we go to faith basis, there's this huge stress on living religious values and almost like you have to be perfect, right? And so therefore, the same thing, weakness is unacceptable. But at the same time, we're all about reconciliation, we're all about mercy, we're all about forgiveness. But at the same time, it's not acceptable to be human. And so then there's this facade that we have to put on, right? Be it in the military, be it in faith-based organizations, there's this facade that we put on, and there's a lot of our human elements that we are not dealing with. And in the end, when we don't deal with things, then things are going to, at some point, send a very expensive bill, right? Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense around culture and around two different environments, but there's also the similarities around that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There was a movie many years ago with Denzel Washington and Meg Ryan called Courage Under Fire. Mm-hmm. And it was a military movie, and Meg Ryan was in command I'll butcher this up, but of a group. I'm not sure if they were a platoon or a battalion. Sorry. And at one point during a battle, she started crying. And there was pushback from one of the people in her group, and said that this was weakness, that you're crying, you're not fit to lead. And I believe her response, I haven't seen this movie maybe about 25 years. It was really impactful. I believe her response was something along the lines of, it's just an emotion. It's an emotion. I'm exhibiting an emotion. You exhibit emotions during a battle, just as I exhibit an emotion. It does not impede my ability to lead. But it's interesting because it kind of ties into some of the things you're talking about. Right? We view certain kinds of emotion, perhaps caring, as weak, even in those contexts, because perhaps it can impede our resolve, at least as perceived as perhaps impeding our resolve to accomplish the mission.
Right.
However, there may be an argument that rather than impede or get in the way of the resolve to accomplish the mission, it actually may enhance or contribute to the ability.
Yes.
To accomplish the mission.
Everything always with good balance, right? You don't want your leader always emotionally floundering all over the place, right? Because that takes things away from clarity, right? What's going on? But yes, that certain vulnerability is a place that gives permission, and this is what I work with people. It gives your people permission to connect with their problems or whatever, right? A lot of commanding officers, if some of them were intentional about saying, I go to therapy, I go to counseling, I go to the hospital. Why? Because then it gives your people permission to do that.
Yeah.
If we're talking about clarity of mission in the military. If we go to caring, right, which is more on the faith base, it's about more caring for your people. And a common thing that I would see in that, we want to care. What was lost was clarity. And the difficult task of leadership to be clear, because they felt that if I'm clear, then I'm being sort of rough or what, for lack of a better word, it's coming across as aggressive.
Yeah.
Military, aggressiveness is more acceptable. In the church environment, it's not. And I'm not saying about, but being clear is so important. Being clear with our people. There's a lot of lack of clarity and authority in church, which leads people with a lot of confusion and ambiguity. In our brain as human beings, we all appreciate clarity.
I think clarity is power. I think that clarity, especially when you understand the clarity in relationship to the context that you're in, so that you can better discern and identify how to utilize effective leadership behavior, and then discerning what type of caring for my people, which is, I believe, essential and necessary in effective leadership, how I employ those different mechanisms to care based on the context, based on the need, based on the desire to clear roadblocks, create a pathway so that we can reach our mission together in a way that's healthy, stable, and we can look back and say we did it well.
Right. Yes. And clarity of, go back to that gift that I said at the beginning. One of the greatest gifts we can give as leaders is clarity of communication, right? Whether it be goals, mission, vision, expectations, consequences, but also I think a great gift is feedback, whether it be on a personal level, whether it be on a spousal level, whether it be an organizational level, because I deal with a lot of people that they don't know where they stand, because sometimes we dance around all these topics, right? And I've seen that in church environments, I've seen that in military and in corporate environments a lot. Holy smokes! The example that I see on a continual level, because I coach people that are part of coaching programs, and they show up in the coaching program, right? Like, why are you participating in this program? And I don't know. I said, your boss missed out on a great opportunity to communicate to you why this is why they're investing in you, right? And then I put it to them: when you have this opportunity, capitalize on it. Your people, when you're put through a program, your people, it's important that they know why. It's important that they know where they stand, right? And usually it's a very positive thing. And so your boss missed out on an opportunity to really build you up and say that we are investing in you for this opportunity. So again, the whole feedback thing, the clarity of feedback, it's also how we care and how we love.
Yes. And I believe it's reciprocating. I believe that we can then embrace and welcome and invite feedback from our followers, just as well as the leaders invite feedback. I think that once we can create an environment where there's enough safety and transparency, that my feedback will not result in my termination, if you will. Right. Because yes. I was clear and honest. I want to know from those around me what they see, so that I can help to determine and discern my next steps. And I can only do that if there is enough security and safety with my transparency that I can be vulnerable as a leader. And I think that there's a special place for leaders in that context. And then perhaps this could be a segue to our next conversation on our next episode around transformational leadership and how we create environments where vulnerability in the right context with the proper amount of clarity of communication is not only respected but effective.
Right. Yes. Appropriate vulnerability. In professional spaces, it has a place, but not to go overboard as well. Right. It's not group therapy in a professional space, right? But there's appropriate spaces, right? And in the family, and the couple, and in friendships. And going back to this leadership, and we're probably going to end soon. So I just want to, people that are put in leadership roles that are not prepared properly, then they don't know how to take feedback. Right. And oftentimes they take it negatively, because we all, when we get negative feedback, it has a lot more power than positive feedback. We focus on it a lot more. But at the same time, then they use their power, their authority to kind of get back at people. I've seen that in church. I've seen that. And these are these highly political organizations and structure. And that's totally misses the mark of what leadership is about, what authority is about, and what these organizations are about. Because then what happens? And I can't just say church and military. This happens also in corporate all the time. Then people don't speak up. I'm not, there's a survey. I'm not going to respond to the survey because, or they'll just respond very superficially. So it's how leaders, it's so important. We talk about love, but also humility is so important. And again, feedback is always perspective. There's always a subjective element to it. But like you said, take it, discern, see what there is of value. What can I embrace in that? What can help me be better? But people take it personally, then they use it, they leverage it against their people. And that doesn't create that safer environment, doesn't create an environment where people can grow, where the organization can grow. Whether it's, it's like, yeah, give me feedback, but unconsciously there's a signal also, you give me feedback and you're in trouble.
Right. Give me feedback, but
so that's not helpful, and that's not humility.
Right. Absolutely. It is not humility, and humility has a very important role in business, and we'll just have to talk about it another time.
All right. Thank you.
Looking forward to it, man. This is such stimulating conversation. Matthew, always wonderful to have you on the show. I can't wait to have you back.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Nate.